to the Fantasy Footballers DFS Podcast, coming to you from the Play Draft Studios with your hosts, Mike Wright, Ben Cummins, and Chris Meaney.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the podcast. This is the Fantasy Footballers DFS Podcast. I am your host, Mike the Fantasy Hitman Wright. You can follow me on Twitter at FFHitman. I am joined for the last time of the NFL season by my fantastic, handsome, smart, funny co-hosts. I was trying to think, I think I went overboard with Ben. Maybe Ben's
one or two too many for me.
Yeah, just a little bit. But I'm joined as always by Ben Cummins. You follow him on Twitter at Ben Cummins FF. Ben, are you ready for the final show of the season?
I am, but I'm still 4 days later levitating. Thanks to Stephon Diggs. The Keenum crew lives on, and I am here to denounce all of this Philadelphia Eagles love that is coming from Chris Meaney. But I also know that he's been a fan for a very long time. So just very quietly, go Vikings.
I thought you were levitating from the Vance dance that went off without a hitch, which was absolutely incredible. The Vance McDonald
That was very fun to watch.
Yes, the Minnesota Vikings victory. I don't know if you've watched the video that the Vikings tweeted out. I assume that their staff put it all together. It's clips of the game that mixed in with reactions of fans being videoed on people's phones. I mean, try and watch that thing without weeping.
Right. I started to tear up. I was afraid to say it, but I did.
No, you don't be afraid. I'm a man. I completely admit that I tear up every time I watch it. And I watch, and I'm watching this video, and I'm just feeling so sad for a New Orleans Saints fan that everyone in the country can watch this video and just get goosebumps and feel the incredible moment that sports has provided. Except for New Orleans Saints fans, which sucks for them because it's incredible. It's one of the greatest moments I've ever witnessed in sports.
Yes.
On the other side of the microphone, Chris Meaney from the Fantasy Sports Network. Find him on Twitter at Chris Meaney. Chris, how are you doing knowing that the Minneapolis Miracle is coming for your Philadelphia Eagles?
I mean, be careful what you wish for, but that's what I wanted. That's what I wanted for the Eagles. I mean, Drew Brees.
That's what you wanted?
Drew Brees in that offense is scary. I'm just hoping Minnesota's feeling, a little bit too good about themselves. And I was taking a look. The last four, kind of walk-off miracle wins, those teams got spanked the following week. So it's going to take a lot of, that kind of just miracleness. I'll use that word for Philly to pull that off. But no, that was awesome. I mean, that's why we love sports. That's why we're in this business. Let's be honest. Fantasy is fun. It's great to win some money, but that was phenomenal to watch. It's still chills just thinking about it. And for the Vance dance, Ben, I don't know about you, but I was still doing it today.
Oh. The Vance dance requires no pants.
I thought that he'd be more involved in the offense, but I did not see 16 targets. I don't know how you could have. That was fantastic.
I mean, that's a fantasy draft stock changing performance. When we come into next year and heading into our drafts, Vance McDonald, I guarantee, is going to be in a lot of people's tight end one range because of that one performance. It will.
Well, he's a tight end one in my heart. I can tell you that much.
And Ben loved Heath Miller back in the day, so I mean, wouldn't be.
Oh, yeah, of course,
absolutely.
That's what I'm saying. All the puzzle pieces are fitting together for Vance McDonald.
But Darius Green had those 2 weeks, that we can always latch on to.
Oh, R.I.P. my dynasty teams. I had him everywhere. Oh, all right. But we're going to move into the actual DFS. We're going to break down these games. Of course, there are only the 2 games. We're talking that super tight slate. Small teams, small amount of teams to choose from. We are going to start with the Jacksonville Jaguars taking on the Patriots. The Patriots are favored by 9.5 points. We are talking in a 46.5 point over-under. It is the early game. Let's start with the Jacksonville side of the ball and work through things. Blake the Snake lives to see another day in these NFL playoffs. Do you have any interest in playing Blake Bortles and company, Chris Meaney?
I mean, a little bit, for sure. We'll get to Brady in a little bit. Obviously, it's going to be the top option, but definitely if you want to save some cash, I mean, Blake Bortles is sitting there, and he's certainly an option if you feel like New England is going to have their way, even if it is, on paper, it's the toughest matchup of the season, and they've already talked about it, whether they're being modest or not. This will be their toughest game this season. And Jacksonville is most likely going to be down in this football game. So whether, Jacksonville wants to or not, Blake Bortles is going to have to throw the football. So, I mean, last week, 214 yards passing, and a lot of just talk about how bad Pittsburgh's defense was. But Bortles was impressive. He didn't turn the ball over. A lot of his throws were in play action formats. And, on FanDuel's side, at least 16 fantasy points in the 2 playoff games. He's hit that mark in 10 of his last 12 games. There's a nice floor there. He's moving around a lot. He's shown that he's part of the offense, just not through just play action, but running the football too. 123 rushing yards in his last 2 games on 15 attempts. Like I said, he's going to be forced to throw the football. So I have no problem, playing Bortles. This is the game, though, guys. Like, this is the one I'm targeting. Bortles or Brady. It's one of the two for me.
Really? So you're loading up in just this particular
I am.
matchup? I'm
going to try to get as many pieces as I can from this game. We'll talk about the other one in a little bit, but if you want to just save some cash, I mean, certainly over on DraftKings, $7,700, you're saving a lot by going Blake Bortles if you want at $5,000, and then you can spend up elsewhere. It is such a small slate that you don't really necessarily need to save cash, so it's not like a must. Like, you can afford to play Brady and Gronk if you want, like all over the place, but Bortles certainly a little bit just to be contrarian and just, again, that safe floor and the thought process of, hey, this team's probably going to have to be, they're probably going to be down. They're going to have to throw the football a little bit here.
Moving to the running back position, Leonard Fournette coming off a monster fantasy performance. It was the Trace touchdowns. Trace. And he could have been even more if he had not had to leave with that ankle injury. But so Leonard Fournette, Ben, how are you feeling temperature-wise against him? It's if you're following, the projected game script, it's negative for Leonard Fournette, positive for TJ Yeldon. How are you handling those two running backs?
I suppose I should ask you, because I can never get Leonard Fournette right. And you, my friend,
that's what I was
had
expecting.
The amazing call last week. So I should ask you, but yeah, I am interested in TJ Yeldon, probably a little bit more than Fournette. And I agree with Meaney that this is the game, because like the philosophical viewpoint here is, in a 2-game slate, there are always going to be some people that feel like they have to spread out their ownership percentage between the 2 games. And I'm absolutely with Meaney. I don't think that you have to do that. This Jaguars-Patriots game is the game. And so, real quick about Bortles Brady, I'm with Meaney as well. Like, what? Yes, Bortles is going to save you a ton of salary. But what are you saving that salary for? Because you can do so many things with Brady. So give me Brady, and then let me find pieces of this Jaguars passing game. And one of those pieces is TJ Yeldon. And it kind of surprised me because I didn't think that Yeldon was all that involved in the offense. I'm sure a lot of people thought that. But part of that reason is because he wasn't even activated until week 7 of the season. But once that happened, he played in 10 games during the regular season, averaged 9 opportunities per game, and even better, he averaged 4.1 targets per game. And so if the Patriots win, which I think is going to happen too, and they force Bortles into throwing more than the Jaguars would like him to, because what happened last week is just not happening again. Like, they put up 45 points and Bortles really didn't have to throw that much. Now, he was very good when they needed him in that second half, but I see this being a game where he has to throw a lot more. And in theory, that would help a pass catching back like Yeldon, who, and this is the main point, again, in a 2-game slate, and why I'm more interested in Yeldon than Fournette, based on what Fournette did last year. And because there's not really any other options, Fournette's own percent is going to be through the roof. But Yeldon is a sneaky option that I think you can get at a pretty low ownership percentage. And if that game script does play out that way, and he ends up catching 6 or 7 balls, because here's the other thing. In the Jaguars' 3 losses this season that Yeldon played in, his target average per game rose to 6, and he even had 10 targets in one of those losses. So with Chris Ivory a healthy scratch last week, and I would believe that that's going to be the case again this week because of what we saw last week with a healthy Fournette and Yeldon, Yeldon is that guy that has upside. Yeldon did not play in the wild card round, which could raise some red flags for people, but he was sick. So now that he's healthy, we saw what he did, and it correlates with what he did throughout the regular season. So at the running back position, I'm personally going with Yeldon over Fournette, and I'm pretty excited about it.
The way that I'm looking at it, I actually think Ivory will be active with Fournette's injury last week. They need to have a backup option in case that ankle suffers a setback. But I'm with you that I like Yeldon because I think that he will continue to be that third down back, which is what happened this last week against the Steelers. Yeldon took over that role. They were trying to limit some of the reps, at least for Leonard Fournette. I think both are attractive this week to play, but I am with Ben that if I have to pick one of them, I'm going to go with Yeldon, but I would probably try and build lineups with both of them because I do like Leonard Fournette. Just to talk quickly, game script wise, all the arrows and everything else point to the New England Patriots, but we do know, because we've seen from the Denver Broncos, we've seen it from the New York Giants, the way that you beat Tom Brady is you have a pass rush with 4 guys up front. You don't blitz. If you blitz Tom Brady, you lose. If you give Tom Brady time, you lose. But if you can apply pressure with 4 guys, like the New York Giants did in the Super Bowl, which were run by Tom Coughlin, who is, in fact, on the Jacksonville Jaguars staff now, which I think is an interesting point for the narrative. The Jags, I think, have a chance to compete in this game, which favors Leonard Fournette because he will be the primary goal line back and try and grind it out if the game is close. Let's move over to the wide receiver position for the Jacksonville Jaguars. Chris Meaney, it's a bit of a crapshoot. Do you have anything to sift through the crap?
I actually do think Jacksonville has a chance to win this game. And you're right, Mike. I mean, with the game script, they're going to want to run the ball. I understand if they're down, they're going to switch to Yeldon. And I'm with you guys. I like Yeldon as a nice play as well. But let's not forget, Fournette is going to be the reason that they win this game if they do, right? I mean, he's got 21 touches in 6 straight games. So they're going to try to want to slow the clock. You can run on New England. As for their wide receivers, I mean, you're right. It's a bit of a crapshoot here. I mean, D.D. Westbrook and Marquise Lee are the guys I think to concentrate on. I mean, Keelan Cole is nice. You want to sprinkle him in some tournaments. I mean, he played 22 of 61 snaps last week. Allen Hurns only played 18 snaps. They're the third and fourth options on this team. I mean, I'll say maybe the fourth and fifth after Fournette, who does have, I think it's 10 straight games now. It is 10 straight games where he's at least caught 2 balls, and for Yeldon catching balls out of the backfield 15 in his last 3. So maybe even Cole and Hurns are fourth and fifth options on this team. But D.D. Westbrook and Marquise Lee are the guys that I will focus on, and they're right around the same price on DraftKings. I mean, Lee is $4,400. And for Westbrook, a little bit disappointing over the past couple of weeks. The targets were there against Buffalo. He just didn't catch any of them. He's $3,900. I have no problem actually putting Lee in some of my lineups. He's the guy that I a couple weeks ago was his first game back. We hardly saw him, but last week he had, he was targeted. He only caught 3 balls, but he at least led the team with 6 targets. Not a lot of other guys had those targets, had those looks. So he's had at least 6 targets in 10 games this season, at least 5 catches in 7 games. So he is, I would say, the go-to guy for Bortles. But again, it's tough to have any kind of confidence to roll out any of these guys if you're only into playing cash and double ups and 50-50s. You're playing a risky game. But for me, I put together a few lineups, and Marquise Lee is in a lot of them at $4,400. And if he can just get you 5 or 6 catches, he can certainly return some value for you.
And
I was going to jump in here real quick. Chris Meaney, if you have to pick your Tommy Bohannon of the week, the random Jag who just comes through with a touchdown, because that could be the difference here between a winning DFS lineup and a losing one. You got to take that shot on some Mercedes Lewis, Tommy Bohannon, Allen Hurns, these guys where it doesn't seem like it will happen, but you know that it could. Who are you rolling the dice on for the random touchdown?
I think the best chance at a touchdown would be Fournette. But if I'm picking one of these wide receivers and, including tight ends in there as well, I know Hearns has scored touchdowns before in the past, but it's Marquise Lee. I mean, Lee, I know he hasn't scored a lot of touchdowns, but there was a stretch there when he was healthy. He was getting targeted inside the red zone. It was back-to-back games. He had a touchdown. It was 3 touchdowns over a span of 5 games. And in those games, he was getting double-digit targets, and he was flirting with about 7 to 9 catches in every game. So I think if they do get down there and they have to pass the ball, I know we've seen it twice so far. They haven't scored a lot of touchdowns, really, Jacksonville offensively in these 2 playoff games, and it has gone to tight ends, 2 of them. But for me, it's I think that Lee has the best shot after Fournette. Let's be honest. If this team does get in the red zone, they're going to try to run the football.
So I like Keelan Cole as that option, and I'll get to him in a second. But since I do think this is the game, and obviously I think a lot of people are thinking that, so just going heavy on this game isn't, going to 100% guarantee that you place in a tournament or that you win a tournament. And so again, as I've touched on, 2-game slates, I think, facilitate playing tournaments. So let's dive a little bit deeper here because Marquise Lee and D.D. Westbrook played in 4 games together healthy from weeks 11 to 14. In those games, Lee saw 27 targets. Westbrook saw 33. So I like Westbrook a lot because he didn't do much last week. He's kind of cooled off as of late. But when they both were playing, Westbrook actually out-targeted Lee, and it was Westbrook's first 4 games of his entire NFL career. So like Westbrook. But then Keelan Cole is starting to become more and more interesting to me because from weeks 11 to 14, he still saw 19 targets in his own right and scored 2 touchdowns over that span, whereas Westbrook and Lee each only scored 1. And yes, Allen Hearns is back, but Allen Hearns to me is the wide receiver that produced at the beginning of the season, but then Keelan Cole blew up at the end of the season, right? And now he's a tournament play because he hasn't done much over the last 3 weeks, but that 45-yard catch that he had last week that set up, I think it was the Jaguars' last touchdown that allowed them to eventually win the game. That was huge. And to me, I think the talent's going to win out here with the Jaguars needing to win, to go to the Super Bowl, needing to beat the Patriots. And I think Keelan Cole sees more playing time. I think he sees more targets this week. And he is that guy that is playing in the correct game, and the game script could favor him. However, he'll be very low owned because these wide receivers are hard to sift through. But that's why you play him, because he has proven to us that he has the upside and he'll be low owned.
Moving over to the New England Patriots side of the ball, we won't focus on Tom Brady too much. He is Ben's play of the week. Chris, is he your number 1 quarterback target? Okay, we've got that out of the way. Let's move over to the running backs. Chris Meaney, you are the Patriot running back skeptic, so I want to know how you are handling this situation when Dion Lewis is an absolute savage beast on the field, yet James White and company keep stealing all of his touchdowns. They're stealing his milk money. How are you handling the Patriots running backs? Because if this is the game you're targeting, I know you're getting at least one of these
absolutely.
guys.
And just to touch on Brady, I mean,
we've had enough Tom Brady talk.
This is very interesting. I mean, we've seen it before when like a top offense goes against a top defense. I mean, Brady's 286 passing yards per game ranked first this season. The Jaguars defense only allowed 169 passing yards per game since the number 1 passing offense has gone against the number 1 passing defense since 1990. It's happened 3 times. The pass defense has come out on top 3-0. And I know it's like you look at those numbers. I know
Brady's got a bum hand.
Yeah,
now,
apparently he does. Like somebody ran into him. That guy should just remove himself from that team. But it's funny when you look at those numbers and you what stands out to me was that Super Bowl, right, with the Broncos and Seattle. It was like, whoa. I mean, who saw that coming? But at the end, it's like, well, those numbers present itself. But you always have to give Brady this pass. I think the game plan will be to get the ball out of his hands as quick as possible, and it's to those running backs. And you're right. Last week, Lewis was fine despite having 3 touchdowns just taken from this guy, and they were just stolen from him.
Yeah. Freaking Brandon
like Bolden comes in, and that's my problem, right?
So
and that's my problem with picking some of these running backs. I mean, that can just happen. But at the end of the day, Lewis is still, even with Rex Burkhead likely playing in this game, and Burkhead, could potentially be the goal line guy. We've seen that before. But with Burkhead active and playing, we've also seen Lewis be productive, and we've also seen James White been productive. There was a game in Buffalo about 4 games ago, I think it was week 16, where White caught 4 balls in that game with Burkhead in the lineup. So for me, my favorite two backs are Lewis and White. I almost want to give the edge to White because you're saving so much cash at $4,900. Lewis is $8,100. Again, I just think this game plan here this week will just be to use all of these running backs. All of them can catch, Burkhead included. Bolden, no thanks, but Burkhead, White, and Lewis, they're going to be involved. You can run on Jacksonville. It's a much better defense, towards the last few weeks, but overall, I mean, Football Outsiders has them as the 26th ranked rush DVOA in the league. Le'Veon Bell and LaShawn McCoy looked really good running the football against those guys. And let's remember, McCoy had really one ankle. So for Lewis last week, involved in the passing game, 10 targets, 9 catches. So for me, White and Lewis, those guys are in a lot of my lineups, and Burkhead I'm going to have some exposure to, not as much, but I can't ignore the fact that this guy can also catch and how productive he was when they were inside the red zone.
And you can play both. You can play two of them. Like, let's not kid ourselves. Last year in this very round, it was Tevin Coleman and Devontae Freeman that were both on winning GPP lineups. Because again, look at the Vikings-Eagles game. Vikings gave up the second fewest rush yards in the league. Eagles gave up the fewest. And there's committees on both teams. So then you go to the game that we like and you look at exactly what you said, Meaney. How did the Patriots always attack great defenses like this so that Brady can still have a ton of success? They use the short passing game because Brady doesn't care. He'll take what the defense gives you. He will pick you apart with 1,000 paper cuts, and that's going to be the running back. So you can absolutely play two. Burkhead makes sense too because we know that he has that goal line role, as I kind of talked about last week, but he didn't play. Sounds like he's going to play this week, and he was very involved catching passes, which was kind of hurting James White when he was active. So all three of these guys make a ton of sense, and pretty much I'm just going to be making combinations where I'm double stacking these guys because kind of like what we saw last week, I see 15 targets to the running back position. And those PPR points add up in DFS.
It almost seems like White didn't play this year, but when you look at his numbers, he had 56 catches. It's like 10th most among backs. And look what he's done in the postseason. I mean, dating back to last year and in the Super Bowl, and then coming out of nowhere last week and just being so productive on the ground, and both, with the rushing and the receiving touchdown. It's, it's not a bad idea. And in fact, it is my strategy to roll out 2 of the 3 in almost every single lineup.
And I do like James White a lot too, although he didn't, pop off with Burkhead in the lineup. Burkhead's missed some time now. What did White do last week? What has he done in the playoffs? As we've already touched on, he's a very reliable player for them, and I would expect him to play a lot more than maybe some think with Burkhead coming back. So I like him a lot, especially on DraftKings at that price.
Patriots wide receivers, Brandon Cooks, expensively terrible for your roster last week, as he has been at least a handful of the last few games. Brandon Cooks has really been a mixed bag, about 50% or so of a hit rate. Chris Meaney, do you like Brandon Cooks? Do you like Chris Hogan? We will get to Danny Amendola because I think he's kind of a different positional player for this offense. But Brandon Cooks and Chris Hogan, they're both the deep threats for Tom Brady.
Yeah, I'm not crazy about either one of them. I know that Hogan really, we haven't seen the Hogan that we saw in the first few weeks of the season. He's been rattled through injuries and the snap count has been down. But I looked at last week and he actually played 83% of the team's snaps, and he played a lot in the Yeah, only 4 targets. He did play a little bit in the slot, but we will get into Amendola. It's just trying to avoid Ramsey and Boye, right? That's the issue here. So I'm not going to have a lot of exposure to any of these guys. And you're right about Cooks, Mike. Only 17 catches over his last 6 games, and he hasn't reached the 80-yard mark in a long time, I believe since week 12. So I have some issues. Now, it's sometimes Jacksonville does, pressure a little bit, but their corners are just so elite that it's just so tough to trust any of these guys. Now, if you look at last week, and it's a total different mindset because Antonio Brown is just on a whole nother level, and he was able to beat Ramsey twice this year. And if you look at Jacksonville, a couple guys have beat them over the top, wide receivers, but I don't see it. I really do feel like, again, just not to repeat myself, it's just this game plan will be for Brady. Let's get rid of the ball as quick as possible. Let's move these running backs around. Let's get them to the running backs. We'll use Gronk. We'll use Danny Amendola, as we'll talk about in a second. But I'm not going to have a lot of exposure to Cooks or to Hogan. I haven't seen enough from either of these guys, and this is just not the matchup.
Just real quick about Cooks. Cooks was pretty darn low owned last week in a lot of my tournaments. And I had a lot of Cooks because I thought that was a Cooks type game, and it obviously didn't work out. But if you remember the deep target that he got, he almost had like a 60 or 70 yard touchdown. Brady just missed him. And if he catches that, obviously the narrative is a lot different. So that is the argument for Cooks, that nobody thinks that it's a Cooks game, so he will be low owned. And again, in tournaments, especially on a 2-game slate, you want to predict ownership a little bit more than exactly what we think is going to play out on the field. So, just when you think Cooks isn't going to do anything, watch this be the game where he explodes, or at least has a good enough game where he matters in a 2-game slate. So I will have some Cooks for those reasons.
Coming off 11 receptions for 112 yards, his best showing of the season. He saved the best for the lights. Get his name up in lights. That's Danny Amendola. So that's his second game of 100 yards or more, which is funny because it's a bookend. Week 1 he had that monster output, 6 for 100, and then the 112 this past week. Ben Cummins, do you want Danny Amendola for the reasons we have just talked about with avoiding Cooks? And
absolutely, I do. And everybody remembers James White's Super Bowl performance. How could you not? But Danny Amendola was very crucial in that comeback too. And, the playoffs roll around and all of a sudden here we go. And it's funny, I'm thinking while watching that game, they had Wes Welker and they brought in Danny Amendola to replace Welker. And it's hilarious because it took a couple of years, but all of a sudden when it matters, Amendola is playing that same role. And Edelman's on IR, so he's not there. You slide Amendola in. And again, if Brady is going to have the success that I think he has, and the majority of that is going to be the quick passing game, that's Danny Amendola's game. And he's still affordable enough to where you can put him in, you can get those PPR catches, and you can move forward to still maybe go grab a Thielen or a Diggs, or maybe even still play Gronk and Brady together. So it's not like playing him hamstrings you in any way, shape, or form in case he falls back to kind of what he did in the regular season. But that's the whole point. Like I was talking about kind of digging in and being surprised at how much TJ Yeldon was involved during the regular season. Well, I was surprised to see that Danny Amendola averaged 5.73 targets per game in the regular season. That's no joke. Cooks led the team in targets total, and then he was second on the team behind only Gronk in targets per game at 7.13. Well, that's not a huge discrepancy per game. And if this is, again, a game where they do continue to go the quick passing game, Amendola should be huge once again.
Gronkowski, gonna guess that he's everyone's number one tight end on the board this week. Ben, he's your
Correct.
number one?
Giddy up.
Chris? Yep, there's enough talk about Gronkowski. It's no fun to.
I wonder what his ownership will be like in
Gronk?
tournaments. I mean, it's got to be like 85, 86.
It should be about
Very
85.
high.
100 yards touchdown.
I would put Jalen Ramsey on him if I was the Jaguars, but I don't.
I wonder if
see
they
that
do watch
happening,
some
so.
film from week 1. The only guy I've ever seen shut him out is Eric Berry, and it was week 1. I wonder if they just watch a little bit of film of what he did in that matchup, and it'll be interesting to see how they treat him for sure. I mean, they've shut down some elite tight ends like Jimmy Graham, but again, you look at Seattle, it's just no. I'm saying, listen, he didn't do anything in that game. You got to look at some of the tight ends at least they've gone.
No. The problem is you calling Jimmy Graham elite.
Right.
That's
Right.
the problem. If you're jumping in your DeLorean and you're
What did he have? 8 or 9 touchdowns this year? I think that's pretty solid.
Don't care about the touchdowns. He's not elite anymore. Vikings, Eagles. The Eagles are home, but they are not favored. In fact, the Vikings are favored by 3.5 points. Check out the over-under. Put on your raincoats. Put on your sunglasses because this thing's incredible. 38. We have a 38-point over-under. That is not very exciting in the realm of fantasy. Unfortunately, there's only 2 games to choose from, so we got to break it down. Minnesota Vikings, Case Keenum, living the dream, living off of the miracle. I'm sure he is still levitating. How are we feeling about him for fantasy purposes, though, against this Philadelphia defense. Chris, can I trust you to be non-partial when you're talking about Case Keenum? Break him down. The people are listening, and they're trusting you to drop your homerism for a second.
I've always been pretty honest here with the Eagles. I'll admit that. Case Keenum, I mean, he's in the ultimate DFS pass. He's in some of my lineups, and he is the guy to play in this contest. Let's be honest. We're not going to waste our time here rolling out Nick Foles. I mean, you got to play 100 lineups to even really kind of consider him. So the Eagles are strong against the run. Ben already alluded to it. And, the best rush defense in the entire National Football League. This is a team that's only allowed 62 points over their last 6 home games, 9 in the final 2 minutes. But this is how you attack the Eagles. You throw the football, and they've been weak against wide receivers. They've had their moments against tight ends. We'll get into that in a little bit. So for Case Keenum and 2 talented, very talented wide receivers, 2 running backs who can catch, and a capable tight end. And absolutely. He also has a little bit of rushing ability to him. He's had 5 games this year where he's ran for at least 20 yards. So for Case Keenum, if you look at last week, what can you say? He struggled in the second half and he had a turnover, but he stuck with it. He aired one out to Diggs. It worked out. He had over 300 yards passing against the Saints defense. So for Case Keenum, absolutely. If you want to just be a little bit different, you want to put every lineup with just Patriots and Jags. Case Keenum, $6,600 over on DK. You're spending up on FanDuel, $8,000. But like we said, with 4 games or for 4 teams, 2 game slate, you can really just kind of get whoever you want. So if you want to have a Viking stack, I'm all about that.
Moving it over to, actually, we'll stay at the running back position for just a little bit longer. Ben, it's not going to be pretty, but if you have to choose between the two, are you going with Latavius Murray or Jerick McKinnon?
Well, I think the Vikings win, so the first thought would be, okay, so that's Murray. But again, like Meaney just pointed out, because the Eagles literally gave up the fewest rushing yards in the league during the regular season, I'm going back to Jerick McKinnon because if they're going to win and they're going to have success with their running backs, I think that McKinnon's going to have to be involved in the short passing game, and he has been a lot more than Murray this year.
Let's touch on these wide receivers here. Stephon Diggs, Adam Thielen. Adam Thielen is great, but it's been quite some time now since we've had a really explosive game from Adam Thielen. Meanwhile, Stephon Diggs is just an absolute touchdown magnet. Chris, who do you prefer, Stephon Diggs or Adam Thielen? Or just how are you handling this wide receiver?
If I'm going to play Keenum, I'm going to try to play both of them, to be honest. And I'm just going to go both of them. And if I'm not going Keenum at all, I mean, Diggs is certainly cheaper on both sites. Touchdown in you're right. Touchdown in 4 straight games. He had 10 targets in that game. He has at least 4 catches in 9 of his last 10, and he has at least 5 catches in 5 straight games. So it's the better chance of getting a touchdown after the catch. He's obviously phenomenal. We saw that last week, certainly the catch of his life. But for me, it's the Eagles really struggle against wide receivers. On the season, they allowed the 8th most fantasy points to the position. 199 catches allowed to wide receivers were the 6th most of any team, and then over 2,000 yards were the 9th most as well to wide receivers. So I don't mind both of these guys. I feel like the ownership is going to be through the roof comparing the two. If you're worried about that, the ownership will be on Diggs. I mean, what he did last week,
yes,
and the price is cheaper. So if you're looking to be a little bit different in contrarian, you can spend up for sure on Thielen. He didn't play a lot, as much as we've used to seeing him in the slot. It wasn't as much last week, but certainly this is a guy that, out of all the wide receivers going, he led everybody in targets, catches, yards, and fantasy points. And again, with the Eagles' rush defense, this is going to be the way to attack them is through the air.
Thank you for bringing that up, Meaney. My tournament thought process likes Thielen more because ownership percentage does not care about your feel-good story. And do we even have to explain why Diggs is going to be a lot higher owned on top of what you said, Mike, because of the recent production? But again, and we kind of touched on this before the season started, you want to zoom out in tournaments and look at the big picture. And the big picture is Thielen led all pass catchers on this entire slate with 8.88 targets per game, which was actually over a target per game more than second place, which is Zach Ertz. Of course, Ertz is in the same game, has a tough matchup, catches passes from Nick Foles. So, and let's not sleep on the plays that Thielen made in that game either, going up, and getting it above Lattimore 2 different times in that game.
Yes.
So give me Thielen over Diggs. But of course, Diggs costs a little bit less. So if you can't afford Thielen, then go ahead and slide Diggs in those lineups.
Now, Kyle Rudolph is the third highest priced tight end of the week behind Gronk and Zach Ertz. Really the only you basically have three options for tight end this week, unless you're just going to completely punt and hope that Mercedes Lewis shows up and grabs his 3 touchdowns like he did when he was over.
He does lead Jacksonville in red zone targets. He does have 10 of them. I mean, it's tough to trust him, but
yeah. So I don't want anything to do with Kyle Rudolph in this matchup. You have I don't want to pay for that. If I'm going to pay for a tight end, I'm just going to bump up and ship a little more into the pot and grab Zach Ertz. I mean, 28 yards last week, combined 9 yards the 2 previous games. It's not pretty. Yes, he's got that Jimmy Graham touchdown ability, 8 on the season. But I just think that his price point is at a place where I have to make a decision that I want to either go up or just completely punt it. So, Ben, you have a different opinion on him?
Yeah, I like Rudolph the second best, and I think that he makes sense on some teams as a Gronk pivot. I just like the matchup better for Rudolph over Ertz. I like the quarterback better. And like Rudolph has been, obviously Ertz was very, very involved. I kind of just touched on that. But Rudolph has been very involved too, averaged over 5 targets per game. And I think that average would have been better had he not been dealing with an ankle injury to end the year, which also kind of gets me excited because I know that this guy has touchdown upside. I know he has double-digit touchdown upside like we saw on Thanksgiving, but because his recent production hasn't been there, and there's a reason why to explain it, I see him being pretty low owned. But it's just, again, I like the offense better. I like the quarterback better. And he is still a very valuable piece of an offense where I see at least one touchdown being thrown, and it could be to Rudolph.
I'll just finish up my argument with the Eagles finished the season, the final 6 weeks, 7th against fantasy tight ends. Chris had mentioned it. The way you beat the Eagles is with wide receivers. Henceforth, I just want nothing to do with Kyle Rudolph. Chris, which side are you?
Yeah, I like Ertz more.
I
mean, if you're playing, the thing is like, if you're playing on FanDuel and you're playing the Superflex, you can roll with 2 tight ends if you want to. But for the most part, I mean, Gronk is the guy. I like Ertz a little bit more. There are some tight ends that lit up the Eagles early on. I mean, Jordan Reed, yeah, he had one good game this year. He had 2 touchdowns, 8 catches, 62 yards. Kelsey had 103 yards on 8 catches and a touchdown. Evan Ingram had 8 catches for 87 yards. Jimmy Graham, Hunter Henry both had touchdowns. But I think he's going to be more involved, in fact, this week in just, maybe blocking. And I do feel like, even though it's tough to run on the Eagles, I mean, the Eagles and the Vikings allowed the fewest fantasy points to backs. The Eagles have been pretty leaky over the last few weeks to running backs. I still feel like this will be part of the strategy. Like I said before, in teams struggling in Philadelphia, partly because of the defense, partly because of the wind and everything that's gone on in Philly lately. Saw Matt Ryan try to air one out last week to Julio, and it just died. Right. It's like he just died. And that's been the talk in Philly over the past few weeks. I mean, this is a team that spent the last 5 weeks in Philadelphia and just monitoring the whole situation and what has happened there at the link with quarterbacks trying to air it out. So I do like, to Ben's point, if this team does get inside the red zone, he could be an option for for Case Keenum, but I like Ertz a little bit more. And that's not a great matchup either, but they haven't played a lot of good tight ends over the last few weeks.
Moving over to the Philadelphia Eagles, Nick Foles. I think we all can agree that he is our least preferred quarterback of the week.
Yep, not touching him with a 10-foot pole.
Yeah, no thanks. I'm not doing it.
Chris? All right. Got that out of the way. He's real cheap if you want to have a contrarian pick. I bet he'll be on about 2% of rosters if you want to go down that road. Let's move over to the running backs. They're far more intriguing. LeGarrette Blount, Jay Ajayi, Corey Clement, and Kenyon Barner. It's a 4-headed monster. Yeah, the other heads, they're a little bit smaller, like Barner is. But LeGarrette Blount, Jay Ajayi, Chris Meaney, it's your Philadelphia Eagles. Tell me, please, who's going to score the most fantasy points?
It may be Corey Clement, to be honest. Blunt. Yes. This is not a Blunt game. It's just not. And there were games this year where he, there was one in Washington where he hardly touched the football field. And it's so tough to run on Minnesota that I just don't feel like he'll be involved unless this team gets inside the red zone, inside the 10, then it's Blunt. And for the most part, since Ajayi has been there, he's not involved in any goal line packages. He's not involved in the red zone. They take him out. In fact, since he's been there, is week 7, he's only been involved in 8 plays inside the red zone. And for 6 of them, the games were already out of hand, and he just touched the ball right around the 18 or the 19. So that's my one problem with Ajayi. But for Ajayi, since he's been with the Eagles, 5.8 yards per carry, that's the second most, right after Alvin Kamara. That's actually since week 9 among backs who have had at least 50 carries. So he's been fine. A lot of the runs, he's just been hit, and it is what it is. He's just hit behind the line, but he's also had runs of, 4 of them over 20, 1 over 70 yards. He was involved last week. The most he's been involved since an Eagle in terms of snaps, in terms of touches and carries. He caught 3 balls, 2 were screens, which resulted in 44 yards. So I'm okay with Ajayi. He's just so expensive, and especially on FanDuel, he's $7,200. It's just, you get to that point and it's like, all right, I'll just actually play one of these Minnesota guys, and who I know are, at least there's only 2 of them to try to filter out. The reason I like Clement a little bit is he's got 6 touchdowns, and all of them have come inside the red zone. A couple of them were catches, and last week he was really involved. I mean, he caught 5 balls, and everyone here thinks Minnesota is favored for a reason, myself included. If this team does get up in the football game, you can definitely forget about Blunt. It's going to be Ajayi and it's going to be Clement. And if it's on third down, it's most likely going to be Clement. And if they're down in the football game, it's going to be Clement. And on DK, he's only $3,100. So I actually have no problem with rolling out him. That's the one I like the most because it's a little bit cheaper. But the upside certainly lies with Jay Ajayi.
The wide receivers for the Philadelphia Eagles, Alshon Jeffrey has had a solid campaign this year. Nelson Agholor returned from the ashes of death like a phoenix. He rose. Torrey Smith continues to be bad. Ben Cummins, what are you doing with the Philadelphia wide receivers as Alshon Jeffrey should get Xavier Rhodes?
Yep.
However, as I reminded you guys on the show last week of Marvin Jones, Mr. Michael Thomas pretty much duplicated Marvin Jones' stat line from earlier in the season. Alshon Jeffrey is one of few wide receivers who is actually bigger than Xavier Rhodes, similar to Michael Thomas on him last week. Do you like any of these guys in your lineup?
What a fantastic call that was. I mean, Marvin Jones and Michael Thomas catch passes from Stafford and Drew Brees, who I have a lot more confidence in than Nick Foles. So, no, I'm really...
Then Nick Foles? Oh, come on.
I'm not really interested in Alshon Jeffrey at all. I think roads are going to be closed. So that leads me to look at Nelson Agholor, because Agholor, pretty solid season. 5.94 targets per game, 62 catches, 768 yards, and 8 touchdowns in the regular season. Obviously, we know that Carson Wentz helped a lot, but I think his matchup is a lot better. And again, like we're talking about, if the Vikings are going to win, that's going to force Foles to have to throw. So give me some of those PPR points going to Agholor, because he should, I believe, have a much better matchup running routes in the slot against 39-year-old Terrence Newman. So that's where I'm looking at the wide receiver position in Philly.
Yeah, I agree.
Chris Meaney, how about you?
Ben nailed it. It's all about trying to attack Terrence Newman. For me, the guy I like the most for the Eagles this weekend is Zach Ertz. I mean, he has 25% target share since Nick Foles has taken over, and people may look at the match and be like, "Oh man, the Vikings allowed the fewest fantasy points at 10 ends this season. There's no way I'm going to go this way. Rhodes is going to be on Jeffrey. That's just going to be a tough matchup, and Nick Foles just can't throw the ball down the field. He was like Matt Ryan, tried to, and it certainly did not work out as the first play of the game, and he never tried again. They could potentially move Jeffrey around a little bit. I know that the Saints moved Thomas around at some points, but Agholor is pretty safe and solid into the slot. As for Minnesota being good against tight ends, well, they allowed 3 touchdowns to tight ends in their first 5 games, and just look at over the last few weeks who they played. I mean, Daniel Brown, Lance Kendricks, Tyler Kroft, Chris Manhertz, Toilolo, Gerald Everett. I mean, do I need to go on? Those are not very good tight ends at all. And the last good one to play against the Vikings lit him up in week 10. It was Vernon Davis at 7 catches for 76 yards. So I think that Ertz will lead this team in targets and catches. I think he's going to be heavily involved. It's going to be a tough go to run against Minnesota's defense. I know they've struggled against the run on the road more than at home, but even still, this is going to be tough sledding for Nick Foles and company. The way that they're going to attack Minnesota is to get the ball out quickly, much like Brady. Get the ball out quickly. If you saw last week, Foles was, he was great in play action. He was really good. He was 90%, in fact. So it's going to be quick throws to running backs, Aguilar and Ertz. And I think this team is going to be down in the football game. So Zach Ertz is going to be the guy, and he's going to be the guy if they get down in the red zone.
And guys, we haven't even talked about my favorite play on this side of the ball. That would be the Vikings defense.
Oh, fair enough. I guess we didn't really break that down. Chris,
yeah, I mean, if I can afford the Vikings, they're expensive. I have no problem actually playing Philadelphia's defense, as I talked about. This is a tough place to go in and play in Philly. I mean, they were a strong defense, especially at home. And for Case Keenum, it's not like Case Keenum can't make mistakes. If we take away that play at the end, he has one interception and no touchdowns against the Saints. So it's not going to be easy. Minnesota went into Philadelphia last year. They were 5-0 at the time. It was Bradford that play, but he got sacked a ton and they did nothing. And it was Diggs and Thielen who combined for 10 targets and only 4 catches. It's a much different Minnesota team, but I have no problem playing either of these defenses because I think, again, to attack, the way to go is to attack that New England and Jacksonville game and try to get some points that way. This one, I feel like, is a 14-10, 17-14 final, and it's all going to be about which defense steps up and makes that play, and both of these defenses are top 5 in takeaways.
I will say I don't hate the Patriots defense as a tournament option. They've been a lot better lately.
Going to move into the Battle Royale. I remembered it this time. We're going to give you our lineups as we go head to head to head.
DFS Battle Royale.
Chris Meaney was the winner of the contest last week, so we are going to allow him to grace us.
It's heavy Patriots, guys, let's be honest here.
Go ahead,
you want to be a little bit different in tournaments, that's fine. But for me, I got Brady, White, and Lewis. I'm rolling with the 2 backs, as I talked about. This is going to be a strategy of mine in most of my lineups.
Okay.
I got Amendola in there as one of my wide receivers, Marquise Lee, and Nelson Aguilar. I'm rolling Gronk, of course. Corey Clement, I just got a feeling about this guy, heavily involved in the red zone, and I liked what I saw from him last week. And then I'm going with New England as my defense.
Go ahead.
I'm going heavy on this Patriots-Jags game as well and sprinkling in a pass catcher in the Minnesota-Philly game. I think that's how you do it. So I'm going Tom Brady. I'm getting crazy, and I'm going Rex Burkhead and James White for all the PPR catches, and that will allow me to save some salary so I can play Danny Amendola, Stephon Diggs, Rob Gronkowski, Vikings defense, and then my GPP wide receiver, as I touched on, Keelan Cole, and give me TJ Yeldon as well as they play catch-up in this game.
Oh my goodness, me and Ben here.
Oh, a lot of similar ones.
I mean, they're a little brother from another mother here. So here's what I got. I got Tom Brady at my quarterback position, James White, TJ Yeldon, Danny Amendola, and then I've got Stephon Diggs at wide receiver, and I also got Alshon Jeffrey. I'm going with big wide receiver. Maybe he can pull down a touchdown against Xavier Rhodes. Of course, Gronk is my tight end.
Nice.
But I'm flexing Mr. Zachary Ertz.
All righty.
And a defense, I'm going with Chris Meaney's Philadelphia Eagles.
I was going to say,
that was the amount
last week I did that. You did good luck. I was like, wait, what's going on here?
Sometimes it just works out like that.
So there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. I just want to take a second. Thank you so very much. I'm speaking for Ben and Chris as well. Thank you so much for joining us in this inaugural season of the Fantasy Footballers DFS Podcast. We are so glad that you took the time to join us, and we really, really hope that we came through for you, win a little bit of that cash money. We know that it has helped people out there as we're getting those tweets. Love getting those victory tweets. People taking a lap or two saying, I took home some quiche over on FanDuel and DraftKings and Draft. We love it so very much. So until next year, I am Mike the Fantasy Hitman Wright. For my colleagues Ben Cummins and Chris Meaney, we will see you next year. Good luck in the championship weekend. Hope you finish off on a strong suit. If you're playing the Super Bowl and the Pro Bowl, you're on your own. Good luck. Goodbye.
Thank you for listening to another edition of the Fantasy Footballers DFS Podcast. Don't forget to visit us on the web at www.thefantasyfootballers.com.